Hello. Sorry for the long delay in making videos. I meant to make this particular video, not to mention many others, over a month ago, since people have been telling me since that time that I was brought up on Matt Fradd's Pints with Aquinas podcast when Jimmy Akin was on it on March 5th of this year. But I only managed to find the time to watch that clip today. So also today, I'm putting up my own response to that. I don't usually respond to things said about me, but I guess I kind of have to respond to this one, since this particular podcast has over 500,000 subscribers on YouTube alone. There, you see it there, Pints with Aquinas. So what's the topic of this particular podcast? Well, if you already know that it's about something Jimmy Akin said against something that I said, then you probably already guessed the topic. Topic is, of course, aliens. Anyway, Jimmy did say some kind things about me in the clip, and I do appreciate that, and I thank Jimmy for that. Jimmy's a great guy. I'm sure he's a way better Catholic than I am. He certainly has a way better beard than I have, and as we all know, that's, of course, a great advantage in theology. But, sorry, Jimmy, you did say some ridiculous things on this podcast, and I'm going to have to address them pretty bluntly and maybe painfully, but all with goodwill, I promise. So anyway, let's dive into those clips right now.
The different individuals will pose different arguments. Some individuals, like Daniel O'Connor, have claimed that the Catechism contains a passage that basically restricts the image of God to man, and therefore, in his view, there could not be creatures other than man that have the divine image and thus are intelligent. There are several problems with that argument, but to tie it back in to the UFO issue, before I talk about why it's problematic, if you don't have intelligent, rational aliens as a possible explanation for these unidentified things, then since they seem to display intelligent behavior, you would be left with the only other intelligent thing we know about, other than humans, which would be angelic beings. And so UFOs would need to be either be good angels or bad angels. And given that they are sometimes reported to do traumatic things like abduct people and traumatize them, that would suggest demons. So you end up with demons as a kind of, due to the availability bias. You've said other intelligent life forms like us aren't possible, and that would point you in this direction because...
All right, so Jimmy's going to get to more points in a moment that I want to focus on, but real quick, let me pause it there and address what he said. This is not a matter of availability bias, not that there's anything wrong with that, and that's kind of a fancy word I suppose Jimmy's using for a process of elimination. Yes, that's one way we can conclude that the what I call non-debunkable UFOs are indeed demonic. 95% of UFOs are not demonic, which is why it's a complete non sequitur. You know, when people like Paul Thigpen say, "Oh no, most UFO sightings don't have the hallmarks of the demonic," I acknowledge that. 95% of UFO sightings are drones or weather balloons or even government programs or optical illusions or anything of that sort. And obviously you would not expect a hallmark of the demonic to be present in such a case as that. But when you restrict yourself to those 5% of non-debunkable UFOs, then yeah, we're dealing with the demonic every single time. And I'm not merely arriving at that conclusion implicitly. I'm not merely kind of going in the back door, arriving at that conclusion by as a secondary conclusion from my proof that there's no aliens, even though I have proved 1,000 different ways that there are no aliens. We can also look directly at all of the non-debunkable UFOs and see the hallmarks of the demonic in all of those cases. And because of the importance of me rigorously demonstrating that, it's one of the many reasons why my book on that is so long. Anyway, let's get to more of what I want to address about what Jimmy is saying here. So let's continue on.
That's the option that's available as an explanation. The problem is the initial reasoning that says the church does not permit belief in extraterrestrial.
And this is what I want to focus on.
intelligence is. That's just false. That's just completely false. If you talk to Catholic theologians, and if you even read the writings of recent popes, they are open to the idea that God may have other children out among the stars.
All right, let's pause it right there. That right there is really all Jimmy has to say in terms of his argument on this particular point. And we'll play more of the clip and address more of the clip in a moment here. If you talk to theologians, they're open to it. I've talked to theologians. We'll get to some. We'll get to quoting some of the best later on in this video. But first, let's acknowledge that something really weird is going on here. I disagree with Jimmy on a lot of stuff, but usually he's at least quite careful. Even with utterly crazy, outlandish, blasphemous things, he'll take them very seriously and be very laid back about it. But here, when it's with me just saying something very basic, which has been said by much smarter and holier people than me many times, namely, Catholicism is actually not compatible with aliens. Christianity is actually not compatible with aliens. He won't even entertain that. That's just outlandish nonsense in his mind, apparently. That's the notion that compels him to shout, no, that's false. It's completely false. If you talk to theologians, they're open to it. And Jimmy, that's ideology. That's not rational discourse. I can find plenty of, quote, Catholic theologians out there who will endorse any wildly heretical and blasphemous proposition that you could possibly dream up. But let's continue on here and see what Jimmy Akin has to say next.
They have not said that that only mankind is capable of being rational according to the teaching of the church.
It's actually exactly what popes have written, as we'll see later.
It's the reverse when you read, including things popes have said. So what's happened is individuals, and I consider Daniel O'Connor to be something of a friend. You know, I've had positive interactions with him in the past, but I think he's
thank you
taken a passage from the Catechism.
And I'll return the compliment there. Yes, I've had great interactions with Jimmy. He seems to be a great guy.
And read it contrary to the intention of the Pope who promulgated it. And so he's reading a text against the interpretation that the Pope would give it. In fact, the same Pope who released the Catechism. And I find that a mistaken hermeneutical strategy. I don't think you can say, well, the Pope may be open to extraterrestrials, but here he wrote something, and if you read it just the way I want you to read it, it actually contradicts what he said, and therefore the church doesn't allow this, when the Pope plainly allowed it.
Oh, man, there's a lot of hand-waving here and nonsensical stuff going on. So let's address what he says. First of all, this is not some slip of the tongue that Jimmy Akin is making. This idea didn't just pop into his head here live with Matt Fradd. This is something that he's been saying for quite some time. In fact, you can see here on his blog, just, even before this thing that I have on the screen now, months ago, I can't remember when exactly, I noticed that he was making comments about me, and I'm not denigrating ones or anything, just making comments on social media pointing out that I can't be right about the Catechism because of something that John Paul II said. So I can't possibly read the Catechism in such a way that it would go against an opinion of John Paul II. And so this is, as you can see here on your screen, his own blog just earlier this week, or maybe last week, saying that the church has been quite open to the idea of aliens. It's just putting it right out there bluntly. The church is open to aliens because John Paul II allegedly believed in them. Now, we will address shortly why the Catechism does in fact rule out aliens. It simply rules them out, period. But let's first address Jimmy's claim about John Paul II and the Catechism in general. First of all, the JP2 quote supposedly endorsing aliens, it's bogus. Completely bogus. There is not a shred of evidence for it. It almost certainly never happened. And what I want to say here is simply, come on, Jimmy. You're the guy who will spend weeks of his life nitpicking away at every little crevice of of any possible citation for a quote that supports a view that you don't like. And here you are presenting this completely obviously bogus. I mean, if you even scratch the surface a little bit, you'd realize it's bogus. Saying attributed to JP2, zero evidence. And you're building a castle on top of it. You're building a castle on sand, to be precise. You're building your whole argument that the Catechism can't rule out aliens on this notion that JP2 said he believed in aliens. Anyway, this bogus, non-existent JP2 quote derives entirely from a claim made by Monsignor Corrado Balducci. Anyway, if you read part 4 of my book, you will realize that this poor man was a completely delusional lunatic, probably in some way deceived by the same demons he cast out of others, because yes, he was an exorcist, and that's happened before and it'll happen again. There's nothing trustworthy about these alien-related claims from Balducci. He repeatedly insisted that he was, quote, the Catholic Church's representative to the star peoples, and that human nature is pathetically unevolved. He said, we're the worst in the universe, humans. and that because of that, we desperately need these more spiritually evolved aliens to come and save us. And he even repeatedly said, you're not even allowed to doubt it. He said, you can't even doubt that aliens are here on Earth. He said it's an absolute certainty. I kid you not. I go into great detail on this in the book, and no one's exposed this man before, unfortunately, which is why it's a very important part of that book. This is what Monsignor Corrado Balducci, Vatican theologian and exorcist, repeatedly claimed, even on Italian television in the 1990s and early 2000s. And he was sure a tool in the devil's hands. He pushed all of these people who were being clearly assaulted by demons, like Whitley Strieber, Dr. Greer, Stephen Greer, these charlatans, Jaime Maussan. He encouraged them all in their demonic UFO pursuits. And I think even Jimmy Akin realizes that. I think he's done videos on like how Stephen Greer is a complete charlatan, but he's much worse than a charlatan. He's facilitating dialogue with demons, Stephen Greer is, as I also have a big section on in this book. Anyway, you know what these men defer back to as their supposed proof that all is well, that they can't possibly be dealing with demons here? Corrado Balducci. And if you open up any page of Greer or Strieber, you realize they're dealing with demons. It's unbelievably obvious, and yet Balducci refused to see that, because for him to acknowledge that as a theologian exorcist in the Vatican, that would have undermined his whole messianic hope for aliens to come save us. Anyway, Balducci was not the first, and he was not the last so-called orthodox-minded theologian exorcist who became a tool in the devil's hands for the UFO deception. So be on guard. All right. Now, Jimmy Akin here on the JP2 quote on his own blog and also on Matt Fradd's show here, he doesn't directly quote Balducci. He quotes Thigpen, but I guess he didn't bother to look up Paul Thigpen's own citation. There in Extraterrestrial Intelligence and Catholic Faith. I've refuted every single argument Paul Thigpen makes in that book. Thigpen is only quoting Balducci. Balducci is the bottleneck here. It all comes from him. If you look at the Vatican's own website, the same account that the Vatican gives of that event where JP2 supposedly endorsed aliens in some random comment he allegedly made to some kid, which didn't happen, the Vatican's website has no mention of it. Nothing reliable has any mention of it. Just like the claim that Padre Pio believed in aliens. That's another total lie. I have an even longer expose on the Padre Pio alien quote, which also never happened in this book. A much longer expose than I've presented on this channel before. Anyway, they are all deceptions. Long story short. See the book for the details. All right, so let's pretend for a moment that the JP2 quote did happen. That JP2, Pope St. John Paul II, did believe in aliens, which of course he did not. It's still, even if we pretend that's the case, that still doesn't come anywhere close to supporting Jimmy's views. Jimmy Akin here. JP2's personal opinions, they do not override the Catechism just because he's the Pope who promulgated the Catechism. That's not how it works. And Jimmy, you of all people know that that's not how Catholicism works. I mean, I could show you, I'm sure, with plenty of stuff that you yourself have written, that that's not how Catholicism works. Let's take a look at how the Catechism does work. The authority of the Catechism, Pope St. John Paul II, Fide Depositum. I believe it's an apostolic constitution, if I recall correctly. He said the Catechism of the Catholic Church is He says, I order it by virtue of my apostolic authority. He's invoking his apostolic authority here, which even if he did in some random passing informal comment to a kid, even if he did say that he thought they were aliens, pretty sure he didn't invoke his apostolic authority in that case and insist that that statement was a sure norm for teaching the faith. No, but that's what he says about the Catechism. So this grants the Catechism that existed then in 1992. This doesn't magically confer the same degree of magisterial weight to every addition someone might make to the Catechism later. But the original text there, which has the paragraph I'm going to quote to you in a moment, this has the assurance from an apostolic constitution that it is a statement of the Church's faith and of Catholic doctrine. And he writes, I declare that it is a sure norm for teaching the faith. For Jimmy Akin or anyone to say that, oh, no, I can mine all the depths of the 100,000 pages worth of stuff that John Paul II said or wrote, and if I can find some little opinion somewhere in there that contradicts what the Catechism says, then I don't have to believe the Catechism. I mean, you might as well just take this Catechism and just throw it in the dumpster then, if that's the approach we have to take. Or at least put it on the very back of your bookshelf in a place you will never get to until the second coming of Christ at the end of time. Because you got to first go through that 100,000 pages worth of stuff from JP2, whether as a pope, cardinal, bishop, priest, or whatever. And you got to make sure that you have every single opinion of John Paul II, every single opinion he ever gave memorized, according to Jimmy Akin's approach here. Because otherwise, think about it, you're risking being misled by the Catechism. Since if we can only approach the Catechism on every topic through the filter and in fact corrected by every single one of JP2's personal opinions, then the Catechism's useless until you know all of JP2's personal opinions, which of course is crazy. Even if John Paul II believed in aliens, which he did not, but even if we pretend that he did, that has no effect whatsoever on the fact that the Catechism rules them out. And I am not asking people to take what I believe the Catechism says. I'm not sitting with the Catechism doing a Lectio Divina with it and saying, oh, I meditated on it and I got this interpretation. No, all I'm asking you to do is believe what it says right there in front of your face. If you just believe what that says, no interpretation needed, no sophistry needed, no weird phrases like Jimmy Akin brings up needed. Just read that and believe what it says. You'll realize it rules out aliens in absolute clarity. I've already spoken at length on this channel, and I go into even greater detail in the book, proving that the Catechism rules out aliens. I've heard all the arguments against me saying, oh no, it doesn't rule out aliens. In my book, I refute all of those arguments also. I've refuted every single one. So I won't bore you with repeating all that here. Let's instead be real quick. Man occupies a unique place in creation. He is in the image of God. All right, the Catechism here says in paragraph 355 that this is unique, and I hope I don't have to tell you what the word unique means. It means there's no other examples of it. In what? In earth? Beneath the stratosphere? On the third rock from the sun? No, in creation. Creation is just the word for everything that God made. Man is unique. He's the only one in creation made in the image of God. Paragraph 356, of all visible creatures, only man is able to know and love his creator. Period. Yes, there's another sentence after that. It comes after a period. This statement that I have here on the screen in paragraph 356, this is an assertion on its own. And yes, it's also quoting Gaudium et Spes. That does not deprive the Catechism of its own magisterial weight. I know a lot of people try to claim that. It does not. That is in contradiction to what JP2 said in Fide Depositum, as we mentioned there a minute ago. Only man, of all visible creatures, meaning this does not apply to angels, of all of all material creatures, only man, only human beings, which has always been understood, descendants of Adam and Eve, which were two real people. Yes, Jimmy, they were two real people who existed on this earth. Only descendants of Adam and Eve. Only man is able to know and love his creator, which is the exact same thing as saying only man has reason. Because the church also teaches that any being with reason can know and love his creator, period. That's it. That right there, that says there's no aliens. Now, as I'll say later, a lot of people mischaracterize my argument, saying my whole argument against aliens is just this line. No, that's about one of 1,000 reasons I give to disprove aliens. So for people like Jimmy Akin or Paul Thigpen to say that, oh, I'm all Daniel O'Connor's, he's reading the Catechism like a fundamentalist, which doesn't make any sense. That doesn't apply to that's a weird rebuke to give to reading the Catechism and just believing what it says. But anyway, this is one of 1,000 arguments I have. And yeah, it's a valid one. It's one of 1,000 valid ones. All right. I have here on the quote on the screen another quote, not from the Catechism, but from another magisterial document, the Compendium of the Social Doctrine of the Church. Now, this is not as weighty as the Catechism, but it's still a significant magisterial document, and it says it just as clearly. Only man and woman, of all creatures, were made by God in his own image. Very clear. I'm not asking you to put a Daniel O'Connor spin on this. I'm just asking you to believe it. That's all I'm asking you to do. So, it even says clearly of all creatures, only made in God's image. I mean, that's exactly the whole premise of the title of my book, Only Man Bears His Image. All right, now, if you want to look at the full paragraph 356, a lot of people claim that, oh, that repudiates what Daniel's saying because of the second paragraph. It says, of all visible creatures, only man is able to know and love his creator. And yes, I have a big... I didn't edit this at all. I just made the period a bigger font, and I highlighted it so that you don't miss that period. It's a very important one. Of all visible creatures, only man is able to know and love his creator. Quoting Gaudium et Spes there, he is the only creature on earth that God willed for its own sake. And he alone is called to share in knowledge and love in God's own life. So they zero in on that phrase, on earth there. Saying, see, this is irrelevant to aliens. We're only talking about earth. Okay, that does not, the second sentence does not say before it, as I note here, it doesn't say, oh, by the way, all we mean by saying all is what follows. No, these are two separate assertions, and they both hold magisterial weight. They are binding on the consciences of Catholics, and they rule out aliens. But even more remarkable here about this quote, the really funny thing, actually, is that the very argument that these Catholic UFO promoters are making about the Catechism, it undermines their own views, because they're saying that aliens are on Earth. And yet they're saying, that's what they say in one breath. I mean, not in one breath. That's what they devote their lives to, basically. And even if they do apologetics on the side still, like their passion clearly has become aliens. So that's what they devote themselves to. But then they say, nope, I'm fine with the Catechism as a Catholic because it's only talking about on Earth. Humans are the only ones with reason. But then they say in the next breath that aliens are on Earth. The cognitive dissonance here is amazing. they think they can have their cake and eat it too. All right. Anyway, let's get back to the clips with Jimmy Akin here, because there's more we have to review. I don't want to keep you guys too long here.
Okay, so and what the passage in the Catechism was talking about is creatures on earth. Okay. One of the things you've always got to do when you look at a passage is say, what's the universe of discourse that this text is talking about? If it's not trying to answer the question of what exists elsewhere in the cosmos, then it's not addressing the issue.
All right. This is the fundamental problem with Catholic UFO alien promoters, but also with modernists in general. And I address this at length in the book. They want you to think that the magisterium has some sort of an intrinsically limited scope, such that we have to look at each thing that it just bluntly says in a categorical manner and actually decide what it applies to, like what its scope is, and what the people who wrote it had in mind, and whether they were really thinking about the situation that I want to do, whether they were really thinking about that situation when they wrote the Magisterium. No, that's nonsense. You know, they would want to have you forget what Jesus told the apostles, whoever hears you hears me. And as he told to Peter, whatever you bind on earth shall be bound in heaven. This has nothing to do with whether the human authors of the Magisterium had this idea in their heads that they only were talking about this specific place or something. Unless they said that, that's just you reading your own interpretation in. So Jimmy's accusing me of being the one reading my interpretation into the Magisterium. I'm just asking you to accept it. He's the one asking you to read his interpretation in by pretending it has these limits that are in no way, shape, or form ever stated or implied. They want you to think that the teachings of Scripture and sacred tradition and magisterium run into some invincible barrier somewhere in the stratosphere surrounding Earth, which of course is crazy because think about how far we've gone past it already. We have one of our, what was it, the Voyager 1? I can't remember which one. It's way beyond the whole solar system now. So does the magisterium not apply to that because it's beyond not only Earth, not only the moon's orbit, but the whole solar system? You know, if someone hitched a ride on that, which is now who knows how many trillions of miles away from us, would he then be dispensed from the magisterium because the magisterium just applies to within the stratosphere? I mean, it's crazy. It makes no sense. What this approach would have you do, what Jimmy Akin is advocating for here, not explicitly, of course, but it's implicit in his argument, is that we have to sit down and psychoanalyze the popes to try and figure out what was going on in their psyches when they were teaching on dogma, as opposed to simply believing it. All right. Anyway, back to the clips here.
Of what exists elsewhere in the cosmos. If it's talking about, well, here on Earth, man's the only rational thing, well, yeah, okay, but that only talks about Earth. It doesn't tell us anything about elsewhere.
In addition to, as you said, recent popes being open to the possibility of intelligent life elsewhere, has there ever been a condemnation of the possibility of extraterrestrial life from popes? Or
certainly not from an ecumenical council.
Actually, the ecumenical council that condemned Origen did quite strongly, implicitly condemn aliens at least, but we'll get to that later.
Certainly nothing definitive.
Okay.
And yes, there are multiple definitive condemnations of alien belief from popes, which we'll get to soon.
And there has been a discussion of, in fact, I've got a huge, big, thick book on this, on the history of the extraterrestrial question down through history.
Sorry, I'm pausing this so much, but I know exactly what book Jimmy Akin has in mind, or at least I can guess. It's probably one of Dr. Michael Crow's books. He's the foremost chronicler of the extraterrestrial life debate over the centuries. I've read both of his big books on that. And Jimmy Akin struggles with what he's saying next. I don't know who exactly he has in mind with what he's saying here.
There have been rejections of individual thinkers like, is it Savonarola, who proposed many worlds with other inhabitants on them, and he got condemned. Okay. But he also got condemned for other stuff. He had a bunch of problematic theological ideas. But just because, even if you have a condemnation in the past, that doesn't mean that condemnation applies today. Look at Galileo. And so even if you had an opinion that was expressed in the past and got condemned that had a scientific bearing, and this all happened before the scientific revolution, the church isn't hanging on to opinions that it hasn't articulated in hundreds and hundreds of years.
All right, that's so outlandish, Jimmy. I'm sorry, but it is outlandish. And the church doesn't have to explicitly hang on to something. If it's been taught in the magisterium, it stays that way. It doesn't need to be reiterated constantly. Anyway, addressing the other things that Jimmy said in the seconds leading up to that. Yes, there are indeed condemnations of individuals in church history who promoted belief in aliens, but not just as individuals. These thinkers had their belief in aliens condemned as well. And as for these remarks that Jimmy is making about Galileo, that's just ridiculous. I mean, Jimmy is equivocating. He's equating juridical decisions from canonical trials of individuals with magisterial statements about the teachings of individuals. Completely different things we're talking about here. It's magisterial statements about teachings of individuals that rule out aliens, not just canonical trials about individuals' conduct or anything like that. If Jimmy is saying that magisterial statements against the teachings of individuals don't apply anymore, just because they were given in the past, which is what he seems to be saying here, then you might as well just throw out most of church teaching. Throughout history, or at least in the earlier times, the earlier centuries, and for many centuries after the birth of the church, most dogmatic teachings were given by way of anathemas against the individual teachings of individual heretics. And that doesn't mean that all you have to do is anathematize the heretic himself. You have to anathematize his heresies. Just open up your copy of Denzinger, Jimmy, to see what I mean. That's precisely how dogma has generally been promulgated. Magisterial condemnations of the teachings of certain individuals. And that's exactly what we have with alien belief. Two separate popes, Pope Zachary and Pope Pius II condemned belief in aliens. Here you can see it on your screen there. They didn't just condemn the individuals who proposed these beliefs. They didn't just condemn Father Virgil and Father Xaninus. They condemned their belief in rational incarnate creatures who did not descend from Adam and Eve. The quotes here, you can find all sorts of details on them in my book, but for now, real quick, Pope St. Zachary wrote a letter to St. Boniface and referred to the perverse and abominable teaching of a certain cleric named Virgil. And by the way, Virgil repented of this, obviously. He was later canonized as saint, actually, so this letter worked. So as for his perverse and abominable teaching, in opposition to God and to his own soul's detriment, if the report is true, that there's another world and other men beneath the earth, or even on the sun or the moon. I have on there in a question mark because the translation from the Latin is a bit, there's a debate about it. I got more details in the book, but anyway. If this report is true, he says, expel him from the church, strip him of his priestly dignity. Now, the ET promoters say, oh, well, we're not talking about before, we're not talking about another world beneath the earth or anything like that, or even on the sun or the moon. We're talking about Alpha Centauri and other galaxies. I mean, this is just ridiculous. So if it's a perverse and abominable teaching, that means someone should be excommunicated. If they say there's other men on the other side, underneath the earth, who didn't have their generation from Adam and Eve. If that's perverse and abominable, you think that perverse and abominable blasphemy becomes okay because you're not talking about under the earth, you're talking about Alpha Centauri? It's just that's playing games. Another Pope, Pope Pius II, and this one you actually will find right in your copy of Denzinger. He promulgated a letter in 1459, condemning the, quote, most pernicious errors, a sacrilegious attempt against the dogmas of the Holy Fathers. And there's several errors listed there. They're actually all prophetic about today, which is why I include them all in my book in that chapter. For now, though, for the sake of time, let's focus just on the particularly relevant one. He condemns, as a most pernicious, sacrilegious error, the notion that God created another world in this one. And many other men and women existed, and consequently, Adam was not the first man. And of course, the ET promoters, Paul Thigpens and everybody, Jimmy Akin, they play games with this. I know Paul Thigpen knows about this quote and plays games with it. I don't know if Jimmy Akin knows about this teaching or not, but they play games, say, we're not saying, Adam was not the first man. We're talking about not other worlds before this one, but along with it. But it's all game playing, and I refute each of the attempts they make in detail in the book. No need for us to go through all that here. But the point is, yes, Jimmy Akin, there are individual condemnations from popes against not merely canonical, juridical movements against individuals, but rather magisterial condemnations of their alien belief. Okay. So back to the clips here.
So there is a form of doctrinal development that occurs where ideas that used to be common, like Ptolemaic cosmology, where the Earth is at the center of the universe and it's surrounded by these crystal shells that the planets orbit on, and the sphere of the fixed stars is just beyond the orbit of Saturn. Well, that used to be a common opinion, and some people like Galileo even got condemned for calling that into question in ways that were deemed problematic. But that doesn't mean the church is stuck with all that.
Yeah.
And in the same way, there's been a revolution in cosmology to where we don't view the universe as a series of concentric crystal spheres ending just beyond Saturn. We don't today. There's been so much revolution in our knowledge of cosmology that now there are options that Catholics can think about and endorse today that they didn't have a basis for in the past.
More outlandishness here. No, new telescopes do not give you new options to consider things that Catholics, for the whole history of sacred tradition, regarded as contrary to the faith. No, that is not how it works. And for Jimmy to bring up geocentrism again and Galileo, this is a complete non sequitur. Whether the earth goes around the sun or the sun goes around the earth is not a matter with any relevance to the faith or to Catholic morals. Besides, even if you pretend it was extremely relevant, it never had the type of magisterial rulings on it that alien belief does, repeatedly throughout centuries and centuries. So Jimmy here is using the same move that all the modernists use, which is really disconcerting. He says they say, "Oh, look at Galileo. Because of Galileo, we know the church has been wrong before, and that means it's also wrong now about all the sexual morality stuff and all that." Nonsense. Whether or not man alone bears the divine image is extremely relevant to faith and morals. Don't take my word for that. Take the word of the Catholic ET promoters themselves. They all admit that. Here's what one Catholic theologian seminary professor wrote. Now, this is a theologian who is promoting and defending belief in aliens. But he's also admitting that it's about the most faith-relevant matter you could possibly imagine. And I won't read the whole quote here, but he's pointing out that discovery of aliens will result in a total reorientation of our limited terrestrial belief systems. Because for 2 millennia, we've had this anthropocentric myopia. We've been so earth-centered for 2,000 years of sacred tradition. Now, finally, we're waking up to the truth. Saying aliens will wholly redefine our conceptions of God and creation. A second Genesis would drastically call into question certain Christian foundational theological teachings about creation, the incarnation, redemption. It would firmly establish that humans are not the biological or theological center of the universe. It would result in a profound reformulation or recontextualization of theology because of this new exotheology. Never trust anyone who talks about exotheology. And the ramifications for Christian theology are myriad. Wow. He's actually right about one thing. He's right about the fact, I'm not even naming him or naming his book now because I don't want to give it free publicity. As I say there, it's not particularly popular at the moment, so I don't want to change that. But anyway, he's at least honest about the huge repercussions that this question has on the faith. It radically affects everything. I mean, if there's ever been a single question in the whole history of Christianity that is indeed a faith-relevant question, it's this. So you can't just say, oh no, this is a science question. The magisterium has no dominion over it. Nonsense. You'd say that about things like global warming and whether the earth goes around the sun or the sun goes around the earth, but not about this. Now, Jimmy might disagree with some of the things that this particular theologian said, but that doesn't matter because Jimmy himself, in the very next breath in this podcast, implicitly acknowledges that this theologian there is right, about the implications at least. He acknowledges that whether aliens exist is an extremely Catholic faith-relevant question because it radically affects everything. Christology, Mariology, protology, ecclesiology, morality, eschatology, pneumatology, everything. Geocentrism versus heliocentrism affects none of that at all, not even a little bit. So the Galileo straw man here is just nonsense. Anyway, as I said, the very next part of the podcast proves my point here, so let's go ahead and see what they say.
Refer to Mary as the greatest creature in heaven.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Higher above the angels in grace, this sort of thing. If it were the case...
In grace, sure. I'll buy that.
Yeah.
I'm going to pause it there because Jimmy's trying to sneak in a little, he's trying to sneak the camel's nose under the tent there. But saying, okay, in grace, I'll buy that. No, the magisterium doesn't say that, oh, in grace, but not in other ways. No, she's just the highest possible period, as we'll get to in a moment. In every possible way you can imagine, she's the greatest.
If there were a civilization elsewhere in the stars and they fell and there was a redeemer, Aquinas says that God could become incarnate, God the Father could become incarnate. Sorry,
I got it. Focusing here on correcting Jimmy Akin, but Matt Fradd, this is one of the most abused passages in the whole Summa, where Aquinas talks about multiple incarnations. He never once says that this is, he's pointing out that this is not a logical impossibility. And Paul Thigpen just jumps on that and just uses it as his way to claim that, Catholics can believe in multiple incarnations, because clearly believing in aliens, and they'll talk about this a bit in this podcast here, it does imply multiple incarnations. It really does. I've got sections on that in the book. But multiple incarnations, no. Yeah, it's logically possible, according to Aquinas, and I'm sure he's right that it's logically possible, but it's blasphemous. Aquinas says that is the idea of multiple incarnations of God, whether it's multiple incarnations of the Son or incarnations of other persons of the Trinity, as Fradd talks about with the Father there, he says that's derogatory to the unique, to the, I don't have the quote in front of me, but he says it's derogatory to the faith, basically. So it's supremely ironic that we've got all these Catholic ET promoters quoting Aquinas to defend their belief in multiple incarnations when Aquinas says that's derogatory to the faith. Anyway, you can find the details of that in the book, but let's continue on here.
If the Franciscans are right and Christ would have come regardless, maybe he has already come to a planet amidst unfallen beings, then
so much for the man, Jesus Christ, as Scripture repeatedly says, being the only begotten Son of God. Absolute supremacy, absolute primacy, absolute uniqueness in every way you can possibly imagine. That's the core of Christianity. To believe in aliens, you need to just dismiss that.
presumably, or at least hypothetically, theoretically, you've got a mother of God
Maybe
on another planet, right? That's a possibility.
It's a possibility.
So
They might not have sexes, though.
Well, but since
or they might have more than two.
Right. So all that's possible.
All right, this is just gross, and I need to pause here to remark on how disgusting this is. But also how this transgender deception is actually so deeply linked to the ET deception. Both of them are rejections of one verse, of many verses, but especially one verse in Scripture, and that is Genesis chapter 1, verse 27. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him. Male and female, he created them. There are two truths right there in this pivotal verse of the first chapter of the first book of the Bible. Two truths. Human beings are male and female. That's it. They're one or the other. There's no other option, and whatever they are is permanent, unchangeable, willed by God. The other truth, which is equally clear in this verse, is that only human beings are made in the image of God. As I've got the compendium of the social doctrine right there, just to remind you of that. We already covered that earlier, but the magisterium here specifically notes that we're talking about Genesis 1:27. And in that context, they remind us that this is about only. This is a very definitive only of all creatures, no other exceptions. Only men and women, only descendants of Adam and Eve were made in the image of God. Now, what a Catholic UFO promoter is going to say is obvious, but Genesis doesn't say the word only. Yeah, you're right. It also doesn't say the word only about male and female either. That's supposed to be obvious to a faithful Christian reader. But of course, it's not obvious to the modernist. Let's take a look at one. This is Father Richard Clifford, a Jesuit, a big shot theologian. So as Jimmy said, if theologians are open to something, I guess it's okay with Catholicism, right? Anyway, this is he wrote this for Father James Martin's LGBT outreach Catholic resource thing, which of course is the source of so much deception today. Here's what Father Richard writes. The expectation that this single verse in Genesis, male and female, he created them, can adjudicate modern controversies about gender is thoroughly misguided. There is no hint that the ancient author knew anything about the modern issue of gender identity. And the text gives no hint either. To use it against or for, he acknowledges, contemporary discussions of gender is to read into a big biblical text rather than read the biblical text. End quote. All you got to do is change like 2 words in this. And then if you change those 2 words, it becomes identical to the argument that Jimmy Akin and Paul Thigpen and all the rest of them are using in support of belief in aliens. They're lamenting that we dare adjudicate these fundamental questions about the relationship between creator and creature and the nature of creation, that we dare adjudicate them based on these old texts, because they didn't understand what we do about science today. You know, the science changes all of that. And that is the devil speaking. That is directly from the mouth of Satan there almost. I shouldn't say directly. I don't know anything about Father Richard's heart, but those words are nevertheless satanic ones there. That's just like this. It's just like the serpent in the garden saying, "Did God really say?" And he whispers those words into the ears with the ears of the tickling ears of people today who has Scripture said have wandered back into myths and embraced the teachings of demons. Whispers that into their ears, especially about rejecting human nature as described in the beginning of the Bible as uniquely made in the image of God and Male or female, one or the other. That's it. Okay. Back to the clips again.
I'm just going with this. If this is possible, then it's possible that there are now two mothers of God.
Yeah.
And then what does that mean? Like, could it mean that some alien mother of God is above our mother of God in grace? I mean, that's where it starts to get weird for me.
Well,
it should be weird because we're talking about aliens, so I suppose it's appropriate.
All right, so Matt Fradd's being nice here. Thanks be to God. He brings some Catholic common sense to the table, which was quite lacking before, when it was just Jimmy Akin saying a lot of stuff. It's more than weird. I mean, he's being nice by using the word weird. I'm pretty sure what he should have said and what he was probably thinking was blasphemous, because it is. You're trying to make the highest dogmas of our faith, some of the most important dogmas of our faith, look like a degenerate sitcom. But what is Jimmy Akin's response?
Yeah, and the answer is we don't have any data here because God hasn't told us. Mm-hmm. At least I don't think God has told us. Now, someone might say that the deposit of revelation he's given us establishes that our Virgin Mary is the highest anywhere in any timeline in any cosmos, in which case, okay, well, that would be true.
Oh, I see.
And so if there are other...
But as you'll see in a moment, this is an if that Jimmy Akin is rejecting.
Mothers of Jesus out there, then they wouldn't be as high as our Mary. On the other hand, I think it's more plausible to, again, consider the universe of discourse. What are these statements about Mary? What are they talking about? Are they envisioning the possibility of Marys on other planets? And I don't think they are. I don't think that was on the mind map.
Yeah.
So right back to the same deception. You can't even just read dogma and believe it anymore. You have to figure out what the mind map is of the people writing the dogmas. And unless they're on the same mind map as you know, if you got a different mind map in your mind, you can just reject the dogmas. If it says Mary's the highest and your mind map has other timelines, whatever that means, or dimensions, whatever that means, or even just other alien civilizations and other solar systems, just stick with that mind map. Forget about Catholic dogma. I mean, this is so outlandish, and yet I'm treated as the outlandish one here just by asking people to believe what the Catechism says. And anyway, the universe of discourse. Jimmy Akin, please, keeps coming back to this idea. You have to have in mind what universe the dogmas have as their scope in order to know what they mean. And I can answer you that pretty simply, just because I happen to have a brain. The universe. The universe. Let's look at what Catholic dogma does say. Pope Pius IX, in his declaration of the dogma, so this infallible declaration of the dogma of the Immaculate Conception, in that same document, Ineffabilis Deus, he also writes, he doesn't merely declare that Mary is immaculately conceived. I mean, yes, she is the only Immaculate Conception. That's also true. She's the only person who ever has been or ever will be, only human creature who ever has been or ever will be immaculately conceived. But the Pope goes much further than that. And this is what too few Catholics know. I mean, most Catholics don't even know the Immaculate Conception. But unfortunately, even fewer know that church dogma goes way past that. It also teaches that Our Lady approaches as near to God himself as is possible for a created being. The crown of all miracles of God. Unspeakable miracle. And no, this is not just about in grace or something like that. It's just categorical. It's blunt. There's no distinctions. There's no qualifications on what this means. It's absolute. She approaches as near to God as is possible. For who? For someone on earth? For someone in the solar system? For someone in this dimension? For someone in this timeline? For someone in this galaxy? No. As is possible for a created being. Meaning for anyone, anything that God could possibly make. She's the greatest thing God could possibly make. And it should go without saying to any sane mind that she's also the only mother of God, because salvation history is not a degenerate modern sitcom. Let's take a look at another act of the magisterium. This is not a dogmatic declaration, but it's quite significant, and it doesn't get as much credit, but it actually goes even further in a way. It's kind of a more subtle way, but it kind of goes further. Lumen Gentium, the Second Vatican Council, teaches not only that Mary is the greatest possible creature, but that she far surpasses all creatures, both in heaven and on earth. So this is not merely, it's not only that she's greater, that she's far greater. So how could you possibly posit alien civilizations who are categorically limited by this lowly virgin, the Blessed Virgin Mary, on the third rock from the sun, billions of light years away from them, whom they never heard of and never will hear of? It, of course, makes absolutely no sense. But according to Jimmy's argument here, we can't just read church dogma and believe it. We can't do that because we have to step back and wonder whether the men who wrote it were really envisioning the possibility of Marys on other planets. And we have to just figure that out before we can actually be Catholic. We have to read the minds of every man who's ever written any magisterial document. And so this is, I'm not sure. It's so outlandish, this suggestion. But anyway, the other thing that Jimmy is completely missing is that it was in the mind map. Silly phrase, but it was very much a relevant thing when the Pope wrote, defined the dogma of the Immaculate Conception. If Jimmy Akin had read that big thick book on his desk about the history of the extraterrestrial life debate, he'd realize this was already a debate that was happening in the 1800s. The extremely occult pseudoscientific 1800s. It's very fitting that it peaked in those times. I've got a major exposition on that century and aspects of the history of the extraterrestrial life debate that even Dr. Michael Crow leaves out in my book, which you want to see. But anyway, the point is, yes, this was very much a thing. It was never this was never tolerated in the Vatican before the 1960s, but it was the church was very much aware that people were debating, that Christians, Catholics were debating this when this magisterial document was promulgated, which said that Our Lady is the absolute highest creature possible. So on yet another count, Jimmy's argument fails, saying we can just forget about what the magisterium says here because who knows what the mind map was of the Pope. All right. At this point, I've addressed everything noteworthy that Jimmy Akin said on this topic there on Pints with Aquinas, and I hope that it won't be difficult for anyone to see the truth here, including Jimmy himself if he watches this video and takes it seriously. But let me quickly address a couple more things here before I turn off this video. At the beginning of these clips, Jimmy mentioned that alien belief must be fine with Catholicism. That's not a verbatim quote, but he says something like it can't possibly be ruled out by Catholicism because there's certain, quote, theologians who are open to it. Well, let's take a look here at what one of the greatest theologians on the face of the planet said very recently about this very topic, actually. Father Thomas Weinandy. He might be the greatest living theologian, to be honest, because he's not only insanely learned and an expert in Christology, but he's proven his heroic virtue in how much he's stood up against the heretical nonsense that's been infiltrating the church for the last several years, especially. You can find out a lot about that on LifeSite News and other places. But he's, anyway, I won't read there through his resume, but you can see it on your screen. What did he say about aliens? He said, the existence of intelligent aliens would be contrary to God's revealed eternal plan for the whole of creation, for human beings, and above all for Jesus himself. Jesus, this holding together, described there in Colossians, is not simply associated with the Father, Son as such, but specifically with his incarnate state, meaning Jesus of Nazareth. It's Jesus as the incarnate Son who reconciles all things, whether on earth or in heaven, making peace by the blood of the cross. The entire cosmos was created for the incarnate Son of God, Jesus. It's as man that the Son of God reigns supreme. For him, as man, to reign over non-human aliens defies logic, which proves true only if human beings solely exist within the cosmic created order. He's talking about redeemed rational creatures here. From all eternity, God chose humankind and the whole cosmic order to be summed up, taken up into Christ, the Father's incarnate Son. At the end of time, we are subsumed into the glorious risen humanity of the Son. Intelligent aliens find no place within God's eternal scheme. His entire focus is on human beings and the humanity of his divine incarnate Son. Throughout the entire cosmos, heaven, earth, under the earth, every knee is to bend and every tongue is to proclaim that the risen man, Jesus, the incarnate Son, is Lord. Jesus cosmically reigns supreme as man. He is not Lord of the non-human aliens, for they do not exist. While it may be fun to fantasize about the existence of aliens, such daydreaming, if it is deemed to be real, can wreak havoc on the gospel, particularly the primacy of Jesus as the cosmic incarnate Lord of all. That's why I care so much about this. Yes, I'm warning about UFO deceptions. Yes, I'm concerned about the apocalyptic stuff coming. It's here now and coming more in the future, yes. But above all, my heart breaks when I see people's faith. They don't admit it openly, but their faith is being decimated by these wild pagan speculations about alien civilizations. And it is stealing their heart away from Jesus Christ and putting it in extraterrestrials. Father Wenandy is absolutely right in pointing out that these daydreamings about aliens wreaks havoc on the gospel. Now, there's plenty other theologians who are in agreement with him, with the correct view. And they may very well be in the minority today. I don't know. They probably are in the minority. But what else would you expect to see the true position have in such days as these? Of course, such a truth as that is going to find perhaps a minority foothold among today's theologians. Another misrepresentation I want to address here is yet again how people are saying that it's just my argument against aliens is just in the Catechism. I know I addressed that before, but real quick, that's only something that people who are just scrolling through YouTube might think, because one of my videos where I pointed out the Catechism rules out aliens got more views than most of my other videos, and then some people think that's my whole reason for going against aliens. So yes, that's a strong reason for not believing in aliens, the Catechism, but I think the stronger ones are from Scripture and the decrees of the popes and sacred tradition and the fathers and discerning the fruits. I think those are even stronger. And within each of those categories, I've got tons of individual arguments. So please take a look at them. There's been so many avenues of this topic that have never been explored before. And each one of them truly does rule out extraterrestrials. And that's why this book is 760 pages long. You don't have to read the whole thing. Don't worry. As I've said before, the table of contents is extremely detailed, and it will bring you to exactly what you're interested in without needing to devote your life to getting through that whole book necessarily. All right, last thing. A lot of people have asked me why I have not gone on Pints with Aquinas with Matt Fradd there. I think they're looking at comments like these. Let me put some up on the screen here that I found recently. They're looking at comments like these of Matt Fradd's videos about aliens, and they're assuming, based on them, that he has invited me on the show. And boy, do we have a lot here. This is anything but all of them. I just hopped on before this video and grabbed a few screenshots here. As you can see, it's not just the comments themselves, but they're getting tons of people agreeing with likes there. Let's see, another page of them, people asking him to get Daniel O'Connor on. Here's another page. More people asking for me to be on another page. And anyway, there's a lot of that. It goes on and on his channel. For the record, I never asked anyone to go leave comments on Matt's videos. That was all spontaneous. I had nothing to do with it. I didn't even know it was happening until long after, and people alerted me to it. But apparently, it's mostly Matt's own audience that is asking him to have me on the show. So some people probably assume that I've been invited on. But alas, I have not been invited on Pints with Aquinas. And that's fine. Of course, Matt does not have to invite anyone on to his own show that he doesn't want to. I just wanted to state that here publicly, that I have not been invited on, so that people don't think I'm some coward here who is just avoiding anyone who disagrees with me. That is certainly not the case. Anyway, with Jimmy Akin here on Pints with Aquinas, we've got yet another bunch of ET nonsense being promoted to the biggest Catholic audiences out there. And I, on the other hand, am here on my lowly little channel doing my best to give the truth, the true biblical and Catholic and scientific view of this phenomenon. But my audience is obviously quite tiny compared to the massive channels like Matt Fradd's over 500,000 subscribers. So there's that. There's also, I'll share with you now, a major Catholic media organization recently was going to do a documentary on this that I was going to be featured heavily in. But that got nixed. Surprise, surprise. There's a lot of very powerful Catholics, even supposedly Orthodox-minded ones, that have fallen hook, line and sinker for the UFO deception. And they're working very hard to keep my message from getting out there. They're working very hard to prevent it from getting out there. So I again need to ask your help in getting this promoted. Please subscribe, like, share, get the word out. Truth will prevail, but it will do so a lot more quickly if only we can get this to bigger audiences. And the faster we can get it to bigger audiences, the more souls we can save from being destroyed by the UFO rabbit hole, which has already wreaked utter havoc, as Father Wenandy said, on so many lives. In fact, many millions of lives already. As the book of Jude says, save some by snatching them out of the fire. God bless you.